My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm glad to be with you all today. We want to welcome you to the 2023 State of Medical Device True Quality Summit Series powered by Greenlight Guru, especially for today's I wanted to say episode, but today's event, the 2023 MedTech Industry Report. So I hope I didn't lose anybody with the title. I know it's long, but we're pumped that you're here. We're excited to dig into these findings. This session will run for about 35 minutes. And we've allotted for time for questions at the end, but feel free, again, put those questions in the Q&A as we go, because sometimes we forget specifically what we're asking about. So go ahead and put those in. We'll try to get to them as they come up, but we may wait till the end. We'll be answering those questions, but if we don't get to all of them, you will be able to have another opportunity to ask us in the MedTech Excellence community following the session. And if you want to check that out, it's community.greenlight.guru. So there'll be a link in the chat to get you, and I'll put that in there in just a moment. So my name is Etienne Nichols. I'm a medical device guru and community manager here at Greenlight Guru. And Radhika, she's fantastic and knows more about all of the industry report than anyone else. I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Etienne. I'm Radhika. I'm a product marketer here at Greenlight Guru. And prior to here, I was in the analytical chemistry space as well as product development engineer at a medical device company. So really pivoted into marketing, and I've loved it ever since.
All right. And I'm super excited to get to talk with you today, Radhika. But we have a poll today, don't we? Let's go ahead and see. Let's ask the question. One of the things we're curious about is how happy are you with your company's approach to quality? And I'll go ahead and launch that poll. While I figure out how to launch it, just a little bit of background as to why we're curious. This is something that we that came up during our benchmark study. So we want to know who we have in the audience as far as this goes as well. So if you want to answer that question, we'll let it run for about 30 seconds.
Etienne, I had a great conversation with a MedTech company, and I actually asked them this exact question not too long ago. And their response was that quality isn't confined to just their department. It's an objective for every department in their company to uphold the quality of their medical device products. How cool is that? That's awesome, right?
Yeah, that's great. Must be a Phil Crosby fan. That's really good. Quality is everyone's job. I love that.
I know.
It looks like we have a pretty good number here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I don't know if everybody will be able to see the results or not, but about a third are very happy, which is really great. Okay. All right. So that's helpful for us to know. Okay. I'll let you go ahead and cover the agenda. Radhika, go ahead.
Yeah. Today, we're going to cover the 2023 revenue outlook for the industry, top business objectives, roadblocks for quality and product development teams and their processes. We're going to unpack compliance. We're going to go over the expectations versus reality of bringing products to market and how investing in the right software tools can dramatically improve your business. We had 613 respondents to this survey. So this data we like the sample size, don't we, Etienne?
Oh, yeah.
Quickly going over the demographics of our respondents. We have a nice variety of representation here distributed across class 1 through 3, with class 2 being the majority. Lots of quality folks that took this survey, which is not surprising. And then we have a good variety of representation from its executives to management to individual contributors. So Etienne, let's talk about high-level revenue outlooks and business goals for MedTech companies this year.
Yeah. So what we found was that in 2022, about a third to quite a few were really expecting strong revenue growth for 2022. In 2023, that has dipped. Now across all the industries, we're looking at something of an economic downturn, of course, but specifically with MedTech, there's been a shift away from looking for that strong revenue from 2022. And we'll look at what that trickle effect is happening in a few other slides. But why do you think these numbers are the way they are, Radhika? Do you have any thoughts on why this may be the case?
In our 2022 report, we asked some open-ended questions to get a sense of why some of our data comes out the way it is. And there was a lot of momentum coming out of early 2022, where employees were going back into the office, operations were slowly going back up, and there was just a sense of optimism in the air. It could just be that MedTech companies are just being less aggressive with their financial goals coming out of a year where revenue outlook was extremely high.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've seen as far as what the effects are, so the financial slowdown is, of course, changing how companies, their trajectory to market and how quickly they expect to get to market, but it's also changing the way they're investing their money. So we've seen across the 613 people that we interviewed, less investment in advanced technologies such as Bluetooth, the AI, the 5G and remote monitoring and so forth. And they're investing more in things that they know are going to, add value, that they know that they're not as much of a gamble. In, like we said, in 2022, there was 60% were looking to gain market approval. That's dropped to 42%. So no longer just trying to get to market, they're looking more of a longer runway and anticipating things from a longer term perspective.
This is a breakdown of the business objectives by department. One key call out is the fact that across all departments, quality, product development, and executive, ensuring compliance to a regulatory body is a top objective. And this is dramatically different from last year, where our top business objective was to accelerate product development efforts. So we're seeing this new focus to compliance.
Yeah, and one of the things that stands out when you look at this, I mean, there's a lot of different numbers here, so it takes a minute to digest it. But if you look down at the 50% next to implementing or upgrading the quality system processes, that's a big number, and that's an interesting number. Just tying it back to the poll that we just asked a minute ago, how happy are you with your company's approach to quality? This is the column for quality and regulatory clinical. Those are, that department is interested in upgrading their approach. Not only that, we have product development. Okay, maybe about a quarter of them are interested in upgrading some of those things, but the corporate executives also are more so than the product development, which we've seen in the past is a little bit different. The corporate executives are usually a little bit higher, but that was interesting. That, as well as the ensuring compliance to a regulatory body. So 62%, again, a very high statistic. Those are some of the interests. Those are some of the top priorities from quality and regulatory. Which may not be surprising per se for that, but it is interesting too, because of all of the different changes. This has become an increased focus, whether you're talking about changes to EUMDR or QMSR. People are hyper focused on, okay, how can we maintain that compliance, and what kind of tools can we use to maintain these things? Were there any, I don't want to run over you, Radhika, were there any statistics that really jumped out of you from this slide as well? I'm curious.
Yeah, I was really shocked at how low, at 16% of product development folks had a priority of scaling manufacturing. But then when I think to the revenue outlook slipping a little bit, it does kind of make sense, but I would not expect that to be as low as it is, considering that product development folks tend to be very hands-on during that process as well, and the criticality of that process.
Yeah. And there was a question too in the chat, where can we find the report or the sources of the data? We will be including a link as well after this. Towards the end, we should have that link as well.
Yep.
I think there's a link in the community too. So yeah, Angela, we'll be sure and get that to you as well. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dig into the weeds a little bit now and look at our quality and product development efforts and what the roadblocks and the opportunities are in this area. We debated on taking this slide out, and you'll see in the report a little bit more detail. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but I can't help but I love seeing timelines. And when we look at the timelines here, you can see we've broken it down by class 1, class 2, class 3, so very FDA specific here. But the question was, how long did your new product development process take from design planning to design transfer? And what we see is the majority of class 3, 3 to 5 years, which is what we've kind of seen in the past. And then, quite a few 1 to 2 years, which is faster than we've seen in the past. And then class 2, quite a bit, interesting numbers as far as it seems to be shifting a little bit to be almost lining up with class 3. And I don't know if that is, I've talked to a few different professionals about this. Is this some of the additional tools that are coming on the market that are helping with those trials and So I would actually, this is one of the things that I actually wanted to bring up because I am curious if others have recommendations or thoughts, perspectives on this. We can maybe save this for the community, but again, you'll get to see the report for this, but if you have suggestions as to why you think some of these timelines are shifting a little bit from previous polls, I'd be curious to see in the chat what people think.
When we look towards product lifecycle traceability, we're finding that only 26% of respondents are confident in being able to demonstrate total lifecycle traceability. I personally find that quite low, considering actually most of our respondents, so about 72% of our respondents came from commercialized companies. So they have their processes, they're selling their product, and 26% of them are confident in being able to demonstrate that level of traceability across their product lifecycle. So Etienne, what is the importance of demonstrating product lifecycle traceability?
Well, I think I would love to see people's thoughts on this, because traceability is really the bread and butter of medical devices. Like, if you cannot trace your product, you really don't have a product. I actually had one regulatory director that I worked for at one point. He said, I don't know whether I 100% agree with this, but he said, we made product, we made medical devices, and we make paperwork. One is no good without the other. If you do not have all of the traceability from your materials to your distribution, you really are going to suffer pretty hard when you have those audits, those inspections. These are, just to Tony's number, 53% is shocking that they're only somewhat confident in this number. So definitely something that it feels a little silly sometimes to have to emphasize the need for traceability, but it does seem to be, this is something that is very important. And
we've seen this year over year as well, a similar statistic where it kind of like a quarter towards the confident end, a quarter towards not confident, and that 50% in the middle spread across somewhat confident. So it's just such an area of improvement that companies can start to tackle or find ways to do it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we filter the top quality challenges for pre-market companies, we found that insufficient budget, the cost of validating new tools, and confusion around regulatory compliance were the top three pains. When we look at these, there are a lot of things that impact budget, right? But when we look towards number 2 and 3, I tend to believe that there are ways for companies to better support their teams to make these less of a challenge. For example, investing in high quality tools and processes that actually reduce the validation burden for you, and investing in training programs so employees are knowledgeable about compliance. It's interesting considering compliance is this new shift, this new business objective focus across all three departments, that we see this confusion. What do you think, Etienne?
I agree with you. It's interesting that this is still an issue, considering that is a continual issue that we've seen time and time again. The third one, confusion about regulatory compliance guidelines. This last year has been really interesting in all of the different changes across the regulatory landscape and the different agencies. So that's not as surprising to me, but the other two are still kind of surprising. So one of the things that we found was there is a challenge with risk management. Now that's probably not too surprising. If you just search 14971 versus DFMEA, you'll see a lot of argumentation and discussion about these two different things when it comes to risk management. One of the things that we found was 30% of people said that one of the biggest challenges with risk management was a lack of ownership. And that it's not entirely surprising, because honestly, risk management should be a cross-functional situation. It should be a cross-functional activity. Not only should it be a cross-functional activity, but it should be integrated directly into your design controls. Oftentimes, we've seen, just from talking different regulatory and quality professionals, design controls and risk management are almost seen as two different activities. Risk management is done by a team outside or maybe in parallel to some of the design controls activities, when really it's part of design controls and should be a continual feedback loop. So that was one of the things that was interesting, that is interesting as well. It's a lack of ownership. But that, again, if you skip down three lines there to the visibility and traceability of the risk management files, that's another thing as well that shows you 22% are struggling to trace both those risk management activities and those risk items back to their design controls. And that's troublesome because when that happens, risk management isn't really being very effective. It's not doing a good job of mitigating those risks if you don't have a direct tie back to your design controls.
Speaking of design controls, to no surprise, the top pains of design controls are similar to what we saw with risk, with the two processes being very closely embedded with each other. Managing both at the same time is posing a risk, not a risk, a challenge to the industry. When we look to the fifth pain listed, managing information in multiple systems, it really leads me to believe that a lot of companies are using separate tools to manage design controls versus managing risk.
And that's the fourth part there, which I don't want to belabor it too much, but the managing the design history file. I remember if you go back one slide, one of those things. I remember as a project manager for a product development company that we would always put buffer for creating or generating the design history file, generating the DHF, which it makes no sense. That should be something that's continually done throughout the life of as you're going through the development process. That should be something that's continually maintained. So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't have to be that way. Scaling manufacturing. This is one of the things that we saw in the 2022 study as well. One of the biggest challenges related to scaling manufacturers was supply chain logistics. So this is something that we really saw coming out of 2020 with the pandemic. It's something people started to get really creative with. The communication and feedback loop between quality and the development teams is another struggle that a lot of people are having. About a quarter of the companies we interviewed were struggling with this. I'll just give a quick anecdote from the supply chain logistics. When I was at the Boston LSX World Congress, and I got to chat with about 12 different CEOs. One of them brought up an interesting solution that they had for their supply chain issue. So they had a quality agreement with someone who was they were in Europe, and they had a quality agreement with one of their suppliers who was really struggling to make their product. They said, we have the night, we don't have a night shift operation right now. We just don't have night shift. So what they did was they agreed, we will train on your SOPs, we will learn everything, and we will send our people to go perform those night shift operations, which blew my mind that they even suggested doing that. But people are starting to get a lot more creative, and we've heard a lot more of those creative solutions. Still absolutely maintaining quality and maintaining those quality agreements, but those are some of the things that we've seen here. Veronica, anything to add there?
There's just been a theme of communication and feedback loops across the last several topics that we've discussed. And I know, Etienne, you work with a lot of MedTech professionals across the world. And I was curious, what have you heard about what companies are doing to solve for these communication and feedback loop challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. Three things come to mind when I look at this communication feedback loop, and some of this could be taken, outside scaling manufacturability or the actual supplier, but remote work has made this difficult, made communication in general difficult, but it also highlights problems that have already existed, not just remote work. Number one, companies need to embrace that vendors aren't just vendors. You need to be focusing on building a relationship with your vendor, and so that you can have those conversations when it comes time to come up with that creative solution. That's really important, to have built that relationship. And I use the phrase, you need to dig the well before you're thirsty. So definitely be working on building those relationships. Don't just look at that as a transactional relationship. Number two, you really need to learn to speak the language of those other companies and learn to speak the language of those other departments. When we were at ASQ, we spoke on, there was a topic that I got assigned, the 5 love languages of quality. So learning to speak those love languages, if you're familiar with the book, the different languages of different departments. People complain that common sense is, isn't that common anymore. But the problem is we can't have common sense if we don't all have a common background. So we need to be learning to speak each other's language and really be empathetic in that regard. And then the third thing I would recommend is we really need to be using up-to-date tools. One example is clinical trials for a multi-site study. If you're using paper protocols, you're already behind. You're already going to be struggling when there are electronic data capture tools out there that can make your life easier. So I recently posted on LinkedIn about my favorite MedTech tools, my favorite MedTech software tools, and those tools can make or break your life as a MedTech professional. So, and this is something that I'd be interested to see if in the chat, if we have anybody who has tools that have made your life easier, it'd be interesting to see those things. But those are the three things that come to mind when I look at that communication feedback loop issue. Radhika, I don't mean to steal the show. Go ahead. And
no, thank you. Thank you. We're going to talk about unpacking compliance. And like we said, it was #1 business goal across quality, product development, and executive departments. We touched on this earlier, but this is so significant because we've asked this question in our survey for the past 4 years. And there's always such a big difference from quality to product development to executive goals. And it's just so awesome to see teams rallying around a critical aspect of what makes medical devices safe and companies successful. So really wanted to bring this up again because it's just such a major theme from our findings this year. And with this focus on compliance, we're running into a challenge where we are finding there's a lack of knowledge about compliance. We kind of touched on this earlier as well. It's interesting that professionals from commercialized companies are only feeling 11% more knowledgeable versus those that are pre-market. I would have expected that gap to be a little bit more, but that could mean that pre-market companies are trying to educate themselves more to match what their commercialized companies might have industry knowledge about, or it could mean that commercialized companies have a little bit more work to do to make sure that they are up to date in those topics. Etienne, what do you think is behind this lack of knowledge, specifically for pre-market companies?
Yeah, we've talked to several different people, and well, one, like you said, we touched on the fact that the regulations are changing constantly. EU MDR, we're still, I think we just came out of a comment period where they may be updating the EU MDR again. Switzerland may be embracing the FDA. We don't know yet. The FDA is trying to harmonize with 13485 with QMSR, which is all great. We love that. EUA may be going away soon. So a lot of those different things, like I said, 2022 was a shifting ground with those things. But the other thing is we have a lot of influx into the industry, for example, for software as a medical device, which is huge. I think the compound annual growth rate till 2024, 25 was something like 63%, which is incredible. So there's a lot of growth into software as a medical device. That means we have a lot of software developers coming into the medical world who didn't previously have this regulatory mindset per se. So there's a lot of new knowledge coming in. So our previous podcast host, John Spear, used to say, why are we still talking about some of these subjects? And, we'll always have new people in the industry, which is great. I love that. We need to be talking and learning these things, even if they're fundamental. It's important to be continually talking about this knowledge. So one thing I would say, I'll just go ahead and plug because I love Aaron Lucas. He's building an academy. Academy.greenlight.guru has a lot of free courses on quality and regulatory topics. I wasn't planning to say that, but always try to plug that when I can. And other resources, and if you have other resources, love to hear those. So John, I know we put this slide together a little bit together. The solution to this lack of mindset, in my mind, is compliance should be moving towards quality. So one of the things we talked about was compliance, and everybody's struggling towards, this is one of the goals and the focuses for 2023, and that's fantastic. But true quality is really more than just complying to the regulation. It's looking at why the regulation is there, and also what is the benefit for your company from a business perspective. How can I make this pursuit of quality a competitive advantage? So when we build a QMS just to check a box and not to spread quality across our entire department, we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot. Yeah, Kamala, I love that. Move towards a culture of quality. Also, the ethical things behind it. So if you have special controls for your 510K, but there may be a few other things that you should test or pursue that would make an even safer device, you need to be listening to that ethical part of your brain and pursuing quality over just simple compliance. And then, of course, from a regulatory standpoint, I talked to Mike Drews recently about this, how too many companies are focusing just on checking the box with regulatory. For example, they may restrict their engineers to only innovate to the point that it can be a 510K submission in the FDA instead of a PMA. So we don't have to go class 3. We do not want to innovate to the point for a class 3. Well, that's restricting innovation, and maybe you'll stay compliant, but you're not pursuing true quality if some of those innovations require a PMA submission process. So those are the 3 that pop into my head when I think about moving from compliance towards true quality. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Roderick, if you have anything to add there, and if not, it's okay.
Oh, absolutely. I think that I think a lot of our participants, they weren't here when I was talking about the customer that I was talking to, like one of the companies I was talking to a few weeks ago. They said that quality is not just a department within their organization. It is a key objective across the entire company, no matter what they're doing. And actually, they were telling me that their executive level employees are going to be taking courses on ISO 13485 and other regulatory courses, so that they understand what their product development and quality teams are doing and why that's so important. So that's really what comes to mind when we think about shifting from compliance to quality and just changing your mindset around it.
Good.
Yeah. And kind of touching on what Etienne said, filling the gaps. How are companies and individuals addressing the compliance and regulatory knowledge gaps? They're doing this through 4 different key avenues, was what we found in our survey: in-house training programs, consultants, accredited courses, and unaccredited courses. And Etienne, I don't know about you, I agree with you completely. I personally find sources like Greenlight Guru Academy and just industry content blogs. There's so many of them out there. Excellent ways to fill those gaps. I know you have a podcast, Etienne, that covers a variety of topics as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Global Medical Device Podcast, if you're not familiar with it, we interview a lot. We interviewed 60 medical device professionals last year on the Global Medical Device Podcast. But there are other podcasts out there as well. I believe the MedTech Podcast with Karandeep Singh Badwell, Dwayne Mancini's podcast, Project MedTech. There are a lot of different resources. So I'm not just trying to plug what we're doing. I definitely want you to recognize that there are lots of resources out there. There's structured courses. And of course the Academy. So it's the best one that I've seen so far, but if there are others, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, definitely share them in the chat if you have other areas that you go to get that industry knowledge from. Etienne, I'm gonna hand it back off to you to keep your thing on.
Yeah. So we'll start by talking about the stat 53%. And I'm curious, I kind of want to hand it back to you, Radhika. What are the implications of misjudging the pre-market time? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, 53% is such a big gap. That's how much pre-market companies are misjudging how long it's going to take them to commercialize. So I think to misjudge that timeline, whether it's overjudging or underjudging it, there's just going to be a downstream impact of speeding up or slowing down a process. And I think that overshooting it by such a dramatic amount, it can inevitably lead to more problems. It's like a domino effect, right? It's expensive to overestimate by so much. If you're planning and allocating resources for a certain amount of time, that has business implications. And there are also implications with your investors to just misaligned timelines in general, right? If you're underestimating it, you're going to be done with that process so quickly, and you'll end up rushing into the next steps of what you have to do next because you're feeding off of that momentum. Now, some folks within an organization will say, wow, like we beat that timeline by over 50%. Great. but does that mean that your next jobs like that you have to do are going to be ready for that timeline? Going through that too quickly can lead to churn in an organization. I know you wanted to ask. I kind of want to ask the group as well. I'd like to see if you guys have any thoughts on this. What is your experience with developing timelines and kind of how it's impacted your businesses? I see our chat has some messages in there as well, but yeah,
I
let
can't
us
keep
know.
up with the chat.
I'm glad everyone is so engaged as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One thing that I agree with you, Sarah. Timelines are always longer than planned, but when we looked at the data, we actually found that a lot of people were overestimating how long it was going to take as well. So, which is interesting, primarily from, let me make sure I've got this right. So the expectation was for class 3 was 5.6 years, but the post-market reality was 3.7 on average. So that's kind of interesting to see how that has changed. But as a project manager, even if you deliver a lot ahead of time, can't talk today. If you deliver ahead of time, that could actually cause some churn within the organization as well. Just to Radhika's point, while it sounds really great, if you are then sitting, if you've told executives one number and you didn't actually deliver when you did, way ahead of time, there needs to be a reason for that. It means you didn't plan very well. And so a lot of people will say under promise, over deliver, but I actually had a project manager, no, he was a plant manager at one time. He says, no, you just deliver, just promise and deliver what you promised. So it's interesting. And I'd be interested to hear what people have to say about some of these things. So
I also wonder if these differences in like reality versus what you're expecting for these timelines, whether the feedback loop and the communication that we talked about earlier, Etienne, like that could easily be a huge contributing factor to misjudging timelines as well. So just love seeing the chat go up as well. We'll have to read those again.
Yeah, we'll see if maybe we can pull the standard deviation for you, Todd, at some point. I don't know if Radhika has that off the top of her head. So
no, not off the top of my head, but we could talk about that in the community as well.
Okay. So there are differences of expectation versus reality when it comes to scaling manufacturing as well. I do want to call out the bottom 3 here where we see the most difference. Pre-market companies are underestimating the importance of engineering support, training, and hiring that goes into the scaling process. So Radhika, I know you had a story around this you wanted to share.
Yeah, back in the day when I worked in MedTech product development, we were scaling manufacturing for new products that we had developed. And there were a couple lessons that came to mind from that experience that very much aligned with what we're seeing in this data. One is that not to assume you'll have hiring support right off the bat, especially coming off of the pandemic. That's just something that just don't assume you have it, even though it seems like it might not be a problem. The second one would be that training it's one term, but it involves so many other things. It involves documentation, people, processes. My advice would be don't forget about it and don't underestimate the effort it requires. And thirdly, engineering support. And when you're in a manufacturing, scaling manufacturing setting, I think that can come in a variety of flavors. In my experience, that was process validation, being there when machines break and being there when they don't pass a quality check or if something is out of spec. Etienne, I know you have a bit of an engineer background yourself. Do you have any other ideas of or experiences of when engineering support is needed in this space?
Yeah, well, I don't have any specific around hiring, but when I think about the training, typically in my experience, when a new hire is hired into a medtech company, a stack of 50 or 60 SOPs lands on his desk, and his job is to read those things, maybe take a test, and that's it. He reads and understands, and then he hits the road. And that's not very good training, if you ask me. I'm a believer in point of use learning, but there's a lot of things we could dig into there. But no, I don't have anything specific as far as that goes.
This leads us to our last major theme, which really ties together so many of the pains that we've touched on today that pre-market and commercialized companies are facing. what we found from our survey is, well, we asked MedTech professionals how many tools they use to manage their MedTech product lifecycle across quality, product development, supplier, manufacturing, and clinical processes specifically. And the average number of tools was 9. And it seems like a lot of tools to me. And this being the average tells me there were people that had voted that said they had upwards of 13 tools that they're using to manage those processes. So it's a lot. It just seems like way too many, when really what these companies might be doing is just using a lot of disjointed tools to manage, for example, design controls and risk. Right? That was something we saw as a top pain earlier. Ultimately, disjointed tools cause problems with efficiency, visibility, traceability, and the list goes on. It poses a compliance risk. I know, Etienne, you had an anecdote or story that you wanted to share around tools.
Yeah, and this is something that almost every company experiences, even outside of MedTech, in that, you know, the disjointed tools has been around for a long time. I worked for a company at one point that was 100 years old. So they had hand-drawn drawings, they had microfilm, they had NX ideas, we used AutoCAD, we also used SolidWorks and occasionally Solid Edge. So just for the drawings, there were 6 things you had to go look up the drawings if there was some legacy product that we were about to repair or do something to. You had to understand and know how to work every single one of those. Well, that's not efficient. When it comes to MedTech, when working in product development, you may be using Excel for risk management, Excel for risk for design controls, and never the two shall meet. Versus another thing for CAPA management, another thing for your quality process, another thing for your non-conformances. All of these different things make it hard, and it really forces a siloing effect too. I remember when I had a CAPA, I had to, as a manufacturing engineer, I had to talk to the person who managed CAPAs, really because they were the only one who knew how to sign into our CAPA management software. So if you could combine a few of those things, maybe you're working at 9, if you could combine them down to 7, it'd be interesting to see the time change as far as the efficiency and streamlining your processes. So
definitely.
Okay, so but which, we mentioned those. Which tools are people still using? The results are pretty shocking. So I mentioned the general purpose tools: Excel, Word, Paper. 40% of quality management are still using general purpose tools. And for design controls, I'm actually kind of surprised that it's only 46%. I actually would have thought it'd be a little bit higher.
So this one's actually from the commercialized companies. We have this exact data for pre-market, and that design controls is about 10% higher.
Okay. Well, thanks for correcting me there. So yeah, risk management, more than 50%, even commercialized. That's a little bit surprising, and it's a little bit interesting that this is the case. So when you look at the tools designed for the specific MedTech industry, only 27%, about a quarter for design controls and risk management, is really sad, because design controls and risk management it's the heart, it's the bread and butter of your device, and those things should be connected. And I know we're very conscientious and we try to keep those things connected, but really using a dedicated tool is really helpful. So that's kind of the interesting thing that I saw in the stats here. Did you have any thoughts, Radhika?
No, I find it to be so shocking. It's just all these numbers around paper, Excel, spreadsheets, just so many areas for improvement is what I see when I see this data specifically.
And we actually got a question in the Q&A. Sorry, guys, I have not been paying attention to the Q&A, so I'm going to have to go back and look at all that. Kapil, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, actually asked, is there any regulatory tool which is initially free for startup, and as they grow, prices will also increase? That's a good question. And I know Sarah just put in the chat, a lot of tools are expensive. I think early development strategy, if you look up strategy by Greenlight Guru, I believe there is a free option for that. So check that out.
Definitely.
It's really helpful for design controls and for the brainstorming process. So, and And since we're on this as well, yeah, we'll go ahead and do the poll, and I'll answer. Sorry, Marlene, I'll get to your
No,
question.
let's do our second poll, and then we can answer questions while we're at the poll. Okay, let's get this.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my job, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Al, for your patience
Okay.
with me here. I have too many things open. So the poll is, how likely are you to modernize and upgrade your MedTech tools in the coming year?
I wonder if our people here that are here today their data will align with what we saw where 50% of just quality professionals were looking to upgrade their current. Specifically, we asked about quality processes, but just curious to see if the two align here.
Yeah, this is something we're interested to compare. Whatever results we get right now, hopefully you'll be able to see the results. I didn't test it from a viewer side, but I'll try to read them off to you. So right now we have 26% saying high, 38% medium, and then 37% low. So that I think we've had it open long enough. Let's end the poll. So about a quarter are high and likely to change, modernize their MedTech tools. Interesting. So it'll be interesting to come back a year later and see how that shakes out as far as the results go.
Definitely. And then really, we asked an open-ended question in our survey, and what the question was, we asked them is what's one thing that would make your job easier? And the results were far and wide, but there was one theme that hundreds of people had responded towards that stood out above the most, and that was dynamic technology. And I think this quote from a survey respondent really sums it up well, where they say, more than anything, I'd like a system that links everything, absolutely everything, like product documentation together. It would transform my job. I think there were well over 100 or so responses to this question that cited technology improvements as the one thing that would make their job easier. So that's pretty crazy. Etienne, what is the benefit of investing in powerful technology to manage the product lifecycle? You've talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of this because MedTech has some innovative engineers. We really do. Even though MedTech may not be considered an innovative industry when you compare it to software or like Tesla or something like that. But if we don't start giving those engineers the tools they need to do their job and make their lives easier, say for documenting design controls, I know engineers who have left MedTech because it's just too much of a regulatory burden. They've gone to Tesla or SpaceX or whatever. I actually know one engineer from each MedTech has gone to each of those different places. And while I'm glad they're having a lot of fun and doing some great stuff, if they have the cure for cancer, I want them to come back. You know, I want to retain as much talent to MedTech as possible. And the only way we're going to do that is if we give them the tools to do their job. So in 1985, they came out with Excel. And that's great. We don't expect engineers to use, draw their drawings anymore. We let them use SolidWorks. And so I think the same thing. I think it's time to start, bringing on MedTech tools.
And investing in tools is a way to invest in your business and people. And just looking back to all the data we went over today, having a tool that is dynamic and lets you link everything and see everything in a way that makes your life easier would solve some of those pains that we saw around feedback loops and communication, because that visibility would be there too. So just another thought that I had there.
Yeah.
To this.
Let me answer. So Marlene actually asked, what tools did you use, Etienne, to ensure that the DHF is maintained in a more timely fashion? So when I was a project manager for a product development, it was actually a combination product, I used Excel and I did not like it. And I used my brain. That was tough. I try to still use my brain. But when I learned that Greenlight Guru was actually put on this webinar or this virtual summit, they have a way of traceability, making sure that your design controls and risk management is traceable. That's actually why I came on, because I felt like I could improve the quality of life for engineers more by changing the way they do design controls than I could doing what I was doing. So I guess we'll just talk about this briefly. Greenlight Guru's our modern quality management system is built for medical device companies. So you asked the question, when I say quality management system, it's a lot of things rolled into one. It's document management system that is Part 11 compliant. It's a CAPA management system. It's a connected design controls and risk management system that auto generates a DHF, and it's always being updated. It allows you to route those design reviews, so you're constantly up to date. So it's fantastic software. It's all validated by your friendly Greenlight Guru team, so you don't have to validate it. So it's pretty fantastic in that regard as well. I remember some companies I've worked with who have purchased software, but they waited 6 months to use it because they didn't want to have to take the time to validate it. So our goal is to improve the quality of life. If you've ever managed these things in these disjointed tools, you'll recognize that having one ring to rule them all, which maybe we're not there yet, but we're working on it as hard as we can to get to where we are one ring to rule them all. It makes your life a little bit easier. So let me see what other questions we have. Varsha asks, can I get a certificate for watching this webinar? Yes, you can. Let me pull up my FAQ. You can request yours on Greenlight Guru Academy. You will find instructions, or you should be able to find instructions on the virtual summit website or in the follow-up email, which we'll be sending soon. Radhika, anything you wanted to add or any questions you see come up?
I just want to thank everyone for their participation today. I love seeing the chat blow up and all the questions and discussion that came through. That's what makes doing events like this really exciting for Etienne and I. So I just want to thank everyone for their time today.
Yeah. If you have any additional questions, feel free to head over to the community.greenlight.guru, and there is a, you know what, let me get you the link to the webinar there as well. Not the webinar, we have a link to the downloadable report.
Oh, yeah.
So if you go to the community there, you can add any additional questions and say, hey, I liked Radhika better than Etienne. That's totally fine. I won't take it personally. And, you know, and I'll comment though.
Yeah.
One other question.
There's 40 pages of data in that report. So definitely check out the link that Etienne just dropped in the chat and read through the details of what we discussed today.
Good luck with the full report and let us know what you think. We'll let you all get back to it.
Thanks, everyone.